Let us work wonders together.
Welcome back for this concluding video in my effort to kill Alduin as quickly as possible within the Requiem mod. Before going into Skuldafn, I went around and spent about an hour clearing various dungeons. I did Hobbs Fall Cave to get Pantea's Flute in efforts to level up my Restoration and Destruction. The whole process took a little bit longer than I expected because training becomes very expensive. But anyway, I'm going into this with 75 Destruction and Restoration at character level 27, which I have pretty poor gear, but I'm hoping that just by virtue of these skills, I'll be able to get through it. This video is divided into two parts, and the first is clearing through Skuldafn, which I think is one of the more fun areas in the game. It's just crazy and chaotic and lots of dangerous enemies. I had a good time with it. And then after that is the Alduin Fight, which is, in my opinion, not quite as interesting, and I'll use that to talk more generally about the run and sort of the experience I had with it, as well as some things I learned and some suggestions that I have based on my experience doing that. One limitation that I had as I was trying to clear through here is my selection of spells is pretty low. Because I was dumping all the gold that I could find into skill training, I didn't really have an option to buy spell tomes for more advanced spells, so I just had the two that I got from each level up. And for destruction, I picked the Incinerate spell for fire and then Lightning Ray as a lightning spell, which just does ridiculously high damage, and I figured that would be my main workhorse for taking care of dragons, whereas Incinerate is pretty good against Draugr. But as I start running into larger and larger crowds, I realize that neither of my spells has any area of effectability, and it ends up being kind of a problem as I get mobbed a little bit going on the stairs by these Draugr even after I managed to take down the dragons, something that I was not expecting to be as much of an issue as it really was. The strategy for this first dragon is just to stay in this opening little courtyard as much as possible. There's pretty good cover available, so it's fairly easy to dodge the attacks that it has, but if you start waking up the Draugr who are over that bridge, then it becomes totally unmanageable. So I just it takes me a couple of minutes to get this dragon down, but once it's not able to take off from the ground anymore, then the fight ends pretty quickly after that. And this is just showing off how strong the Lightning Ray ability is. I'd be doing better damage if I had a cold spell to use on this fire dragon, but since I don't, Lightning Ray is adequate to get the job done. And then I'm heading across the bridge to try and tackle these this large mob of Draugr who all unfortunately tend to summon Frost Atronachs, making it a real mob situation. And again, trying not to go too far forward, both to not wake up too many of them and also stall out the next dragon fight a little bit until this area is more under control. And I have a moderate degree of magic resistance at this point. I've gained a little bit naturally from just dumping all of my points into Magicka. I've got the 3 perks in Alteration, and then I have the skill perk within Speech to give some resistance to Dragon Shouts, which helps a little bit. Also, the perk from Mage Armor to reduce damage should in theory help, but it's still pretty easy to get killed once enemies start coming from a couple of different directions at once, as you can see. So on my next attempt through this area, I end up leading them through a couple of different zones within here with the goal of splitting up the big pack a bit more so that they're not able to blindside me as easily, and also not having to deal with all the Frost Atronachs at once is a pretty big deal. And here I'm just kind of trying to lure enemies to come down and approach me one at a time. And there's also a big clump of archers standing up on the balcony up there who are shooting arrows at me, but it's hard to take the time to actually shoot back at them. But now the big clump of frost atronach starts coming after me, and so I decide that I want to back up a little bit further and make it harder to get at them, or harder for them to get at me with the terrain. And it is pretty dangerous to run away from some of those Draugr, because the ones with a frost effect can slow you down dramatically and make it really hard to actually get away. And so the shouts, sometimes they're effective against me, sometimes they aren't. And I think having a little bit more magic resist would have been nice to reduce that, but it just didn't happen in my preparations to find anything to improve that. But standing under the bridge here is a pretty safe spot where enemies can only get at you one at a time, and they come pretty slowly. And I'm just sort of looking around for openings and trying to see if there's guys I can pick off here and there. The Incinerate spell has a pretty high velocity that the projectile travels at, and so it's got good range. Although my aim is far from the best out there, but it's a better long-range spell than most. And this clump of Draugr all get sort of funneled into this little area where I can pick them off at very little danger to myself. And I don't really want to be spending my time killing frost atronachs wherever possible, because they get resummoned really quickly. Even though they go down pretty fast to fire magic, it's just not worth the effort as much as can be helped anyway. And now I've kind of settled on a setup where I've got a healing spell in the left hand and a fire spell in the right hand, and then as long as I'm not running out of mana, it's almost impossible for me to die when I've got those two up, because after taking all the healing perks, my heal spell is now extremely efficient. And after kind of thinning out the pack here, I feel like I can push forward a little bit further, take a few pot shots at the guys up top, although not all that successfully. And now I can tell there's a dragon priest up there on the rocks, which it's far enough away I don't have to deal with it right now, but I probably will have to get it at some point later on. And then this dragon priest over here, there's both a frost and a fire dragon priest in this area. They're both respectively pretty dangerous, and it's important to use the right element on each of them. And I'm able to just knock it off the balcony with the shout, so I don't have to go back and worry too much about killing it. Because I think if I make a little distance, it won't come through with me into the next zone. And now we're on to the second dragon, which, thanks to having a really good fire spell, it actually goes down pretty quickly. And you can see just the big difference in damage it makes to use the appropriate element against the dragon. and somehow the Dragon Priest has crawled back up from the spot where I knocked it down earlier and started shooting me in the back with ice bolts, so I decided that I want to go take care of that right away. And having the healing perk where the healing spells also recharge stamina is huge, because the big thing that makes ice magic so unpleasant to fight against is once it drains your stamina, then you can't run away and your spell costs all go up. And so just having a very easy cure for that is it's a pretty big help. It's one of the big reasons that I wanted to get restoration up to 75, in addition to the mysticism perk, which is making all of my spells more effective against undead, which, well, it's basically everything around here. Anyway, the Dragon Priest goes down pretty fast to Sunfire. And I think that was a fire hit from the Dragon Priest standing up on the balcony, which comes pretty close to killing me. And here I realize I've got some extra perk points that I haven't allocated yet, so I dumped some more points into my fire spells. I wasn't sure going in whether that would be necessary or not. I thought for a while that Sunfire might be good enough to kill everything, but it's a lot more efficient, as it turns out, to use this buffed up incinerate effect instead, because it can just 1 or 2 shot Draugr, whereas Sunfire takes 4 or 5 shots. Even though it has lower mana cost, it's just more important to take stuff down quickly. And all through here I was really wishing that I had got a fireball spell, because it would be really nice against those big clumps of Draugr to just be able to do area of effect damage against them. And so I think it would have been quite a bit faster if I had picked that up. So I took a couple of attempts on going up this set of stairs, because there's still a lot of Draugr up there, and it takes me a little while to figure out what the best approach is, because there is still a Dragon Priest on this upper level, in addition to who knows how many high level Draugr that are still hanging out up there. And I can kind of see them running around to get closer to me, but I eventually decide that my best strategy is just to not worry about picking them all off outside and just make my way into the temple as quickly as I can. I know that the guys will spawn on top of me, but I figure it's going to be more manageable to have them all coming at me in one direction instead of from all different angles at the same time. This next section through the temple is quite a bit easier and more manageable, and I just draw a big clump of enemies up toward the top of these stairs here, and then I'm able to pick them off one at a time. And then after that, it's just a matter of running through the rest of the temple to advance through this zone, which there's still some pretty respectably difficult enemies, but I thought this would also be a good time to talk about some more general concepts with the... I'm not going to quite call this a speed run, as it wasn't all that fast, but this rush toward Alduin and kind of the experience I had with it and some possible improvements to make, as well as what I think it has to say about game balance for stuff in the end game. And as I'm doing this video, it's actually the day after 3.3 was just released for Requiem, and I'm told that that increases the armor and resistance for some of the later game enemies. I'm not on 3.3 yet because it hasn't been ported over to the special edition, which is what I'm using, at least not at this point. Also, I don't think it would make all that significant a difference in how these fights go. I don't think you could make the Dragon Priests more resistant to magic than they already are without making them fully immune. And so, who knows, maybe I'm completely wrong on this point, but my impression is that there would not be a significant difference in how this goes with 3.3. Maybe I'll do a comparison video later on. But just to talk more about this run in general, I think there are some areas where I could have made some improvements. The Companion's quest line was, well, it made a lot of these later areas quite a bit easier, because having the extra health made stuff like Blackreach a lot less dangerous. I probably would have died many, many more times going through there, but instead of going through the companion's quest, I could have possibly just used the Augma Infinium and dumped that into health instead of magicka, as I did here, and it likely would have had a similar feel to it, and it probably would have shaved off an hour or two of my game time. I also think that I underestimated how much it was going to cost me to train up my destruction and restoration spells sufficiently, and so there was a big kind of stall out when I hit in the 60s with destruction and restoration, where I had to go and do a bunch of random areas. I didn't have any particular plan of how to find more gold around those zones, and so there was some kind of undirected play there. So I think either having a plan of where to farm up those additional levels, maybe just grinding alteration and restoration, like casting summoned skeletons and blasting them with fireballs, that might have been faster than the way I did it, or maybe there was some more effective way to farm gold that I didn't know about. And I decided pretty early that I didn't want to do any sort of crafting in order to find gold, because that seems pretty time consuming, but who knows, maybe it would have been correct to do a little bit of alchemy and just pick up high valued ingredients and sell potions in order to make it a little bit easier to get all the necessary gold for the training, and that could have maybe shaved off a little bit more time from this playthrough as well. Also, I think I had some kind of indecisive moments in deciding which routes I wanted to take, and so I had to backtrack in areas. I didn't video all of that because it's kind of boring to see, but I think that could have shaved down my final time, which I'll reveal that at the very end of the video, how long this whole run took me, but I think it could have been a little bit lower had I planned that out a little bit more than just the big areas that I wanted to reach in order to get the necessary gear and skills in order to pass through the kind of barriers that are set by different parts of the quest. Also, like some other little things, like maybe it wasn't actually necessary to get the expert robes of destruction because mana is largely a non-issue after being able to get the necromancer's amulet and do the trick of swapping that on and off. And so maybe I didn't even need to go into Renvig's Fast and get the expert robes of destruction. That may have just been totally unnecessary. So little things like that, if someone were wanting to optimize on this run, those would be some areas that they might be able to do it. And I'm pretty convinced that doing it as a mage is the correct, fastest way if your goal is only to complete the late game, because well, it's not like it's any news to anybody that destruction is ridiculously strong after you get it to about level 50. And after doing this experience, I have basically no desire to play another destruction mage ever again. But what does it say about balance going through this run? Well, the other thing I would note is that the ability to quick save and reload, again, as no surprise to anybody, does kind of ruin the challenge to large portions of the game. Just being able to retry fights over and over again until you get them right, well, that is what this run was based around. And so it did what I intended it to do, which is let me go through content that I really had no business beating. But I think for my future playthroughs, and what I would encourage other people who already have some experience with Requiem to do, is limit yourself. Maybe don't allow quick saves. There's some hardcore saving mods which I've been investigating, which only let you save on sleep or in other specific circumstances. Those seem like a good thing to experiment with, and I'm going to be doing that in my next playthrough. Some more specific balance considerations that I thought it was worth mentioning. Well, for one, the exploit with the Necromancer's Amulet and being able to switch it on and off instantly by having it on a hotkey completely destroys any sort of balance with playing as a mage, because it's supposed to be the limiting factor is you can't regenerate magicka all that quickly. Well, when you just switch it on and off and gain 150 magicka whenever you're run out, that is no longer an issue whatsoever, and it basically breaks the balance of the game. And in previous versions of Requiem, you couldn't switch any items on or off during combat, which I can understand why they took that off, because it was pretty annoying. But I think there should be something specific tied to the Necromancer's Amulet, where either it gives you like a big health debuff or something like that whenever you take the thing off, or maybe just make it like the Cursed Ring of Hircine, where you have no ability to remove it whatsoever. The Necromancer's Amulet is so easy to get early on and is one of the most powerful items you can get, especially because whenever well, the only downside of it is reducing your stamina and health regeneration. You just take it off whenever that happens, and then suddenly there's practically no downside, and you get this huge magic boost. So I think the Necromancer's Amulet deserves some tweaking one way or the other. And of course, if you value the challenge and interest of your playthrough, it's probably you just don't use the exploit of switching the thing on and off. But even without doing that, having the extra 150 magic is way too powerful for an item you can get easily before level 10 with no real gating or difficult enemies in between you and it. The other thing I might mention is the werewolf form. It's kind of silly that a dedicated mage character can just go through the first 3 or so quests of the companions and get this huge boost, which is equivalent to dozens and dozens of level ups in health and stamina. I think that werewolf form should come with some kind of a debuff to your magic ability. So like, for example, maybe you get to have an extra 100 health and stamina, but you get minus 50 magic when you do it. I don't think werewolves are well known for their mental capacity. So I think having some kind of a nerf to werewolf form would make sense, because right now there's practically no downside to it. Not being able to get the resting bonus is pretty trivial. So I think that that's another area that just for balance would be worth looking at. But more generally, I would just say, for anyone who's curious about doing this sort of a run, well, was it fun to do? I enjoyed the earliest parts of this run because building a new character is always kind of interesting, and it was kind of challenging and different trying to go through some of those quests early on. But right about the time that Destruction hit level 50, the characters stopped being really interesting, and I just wanted to push through it and get it done because I had gotten that far and I wanted to have it complete. But I'm not sure what can really be done about the progression of destruction magic, because it is powerful as it's intended to be. I mean, it's destruction magic, its purpose is to do damage, and it's very successful at doing that. And I'm not sure in what ways it could be nerfed while still having any validity whatsoever, but I do think that just the general inclination that people have that your game becomes, well, early on with destruction magic, it's kind of boring and frustrating to use because it feels underpowered. Then it hits 50 and suddenly it feels very overpowered. I'm not sure exactly what the fix to that is, but it would be nice to have one. Part of what motivated me to try out this project was on the last character I played, an illusion-focused mage. I got to the high 30s and realized that there was no way I was going to be able to progress the character further through the end game with the skills that I had, and I would have to transition to a destruction mage in order to really get there. And I also had the realization that it was probably going to be faster for me to just start a new character fresh if I wanted to do that, rather than trying to level up the skills naturally. And I think that ended up being the case, given how long it took me to finish up this playthrough. And it's a little bit unfortunate for role-playing purposes that in order to beat Skuldafn and Alduin, basically you either need to go Destruction Restoration, or you need to go with a melee skill plus archery. There's practically no other way to do it, or at the very least, if you do attempt it that way, you're intentionally handicapping yourself somewhat. And that's just the nature of how Skyrim was designed, even in spite of the improvements and changes that the Requiem developers have put in. And it's also a little bit unfortunate that while the main quest line is where the really fun and difficult parts of the game are, it's also largely kind of uninteresting, in my opinion. The main quest line is all downhill after Bleak Falls Barrow and maybe the Thalmor Embassy. Both those are pretty fun and challenging, but then there's a lot of stuff that just sort of feels like filler. And there's only so much that a gameplay overhaul mod can do in order to fix a fundamentally limited quest system that we got from Bethesda, but still, it does feel a little bit unfortunate. And to highlight the Alduin Fight a little bit more specifically, I think part of the problem with it is just the terrain that you have to work with is very limiting in the kind of tactics that you can use. And this problem is made a little bit worse by the added ability that Alduin has, where he'll summon this mob of wraithmen and bone men, which, unless you have a truly overpowered build, much more powerful than this one, well, you're never going to be able to clear those, and your best approach is to run away up the bridge where they can't notice you. And if you try and go out into the open areas at all, there's not enough cover and you're just going to die instantly. And I read in the development notes that there was a change in 3.2 where Alduin uses the summon ability more frequently. I didn't really notice it in this fight. When I fought Alduin in 3.1, he used the summon effect once when he was at about a third life. This time he used it when he was at about 3/4 life. In both cases, it only happened once during the fight, which I'm not going to say I really miss it, because the summon ability is basically run away or you die, at least in the way that I have been playing through this. And so him using it more often, I'm not sure if it would make the fight more interesting. It might just make it take longer. And it's a little bit unfortunate that Alduin has such a limited scope of powers that he uses. Aside from the summon effect, all that he does otherwise is a degeneration shout, which puts a debuff on you, which, in my experience, again, regardless of how much magic resist that you have or shout resist that you have, unless you clear off that debuff with a potion of cleansing or a dispel effect, it's just going to kill you. And if you do have enough potions of cleansing, or if you have enough restoration magic to be able to cast dispel whenever he hits that with you, then his attacks are effectively harmless and have no effect on you whatsoever, which again is a little bit unfortunate. I feel like having more variety of what Alduin could do would make the fight a lot more interesting, and he does just spend a lot of time kind of sitting around on tall mountains and staring at you and waiting for you to hit him with stuff. And I honestly have no idea how difficult it would be from a mod maker's perspective in order to add different phases to the Alduin fight. Like if he were to summon other dragons that you had defeated up to that point, that would be kind of cool. Like if there was the more dragon souls you had collected before you fight Alduin, the more allies that he can summon for himself, that would also be kind of cool, because it would give you some strategic trade-off to, if you make your character really well geared out, then you're going to have a tougher fight at the end. That would be kind of nice. Or just in general, if he had some other attacks besides the drain effect, which, well, the first time you fight Alduin and maybe you don't come prepared with cleansing potions, it's going to be really frustrating to fight against, because if he gets you with it at all, the fight is over and you've lost. But once you know about it and you come with a little bit of preparation, it's completely harmless and the fight becomes incredibly trivial. So aside from the general AI issues, like at some point within this fight, Alduin just goes to ground and kind of stares at me while I fire destruction spells at him, and that's the incredibly anticlimactic end to this boss battle. But what can you say? The Bethesda gives a certain degree of tools or a certain framework that mod authors can add or subtract from, but you're still working off of that same skeleton, and it certainly wouldn't be fair of me to complain about Requiem not fixing all the issues with Skyrim, because it's already made a huge improvement in the game and I've enjoyed a lot in playing it. So final thoughts on this accelerated run toward Alduin. I had a good time with the planning of it, and I think it, like thinking about the locations that you need to go to in order to get through the various obstacles that Requiem places in your way. I thought that was kind of interesting and exciting. I had a good time with that. The actual process of going through the main quest became a bit of a grind, and I just wanted it to be over at a certain point. But if anyone else has suggestions on ways to improve a run like this, well, I don't intend to attempt something like this again anytime soon, but it's fun to think about ways that you might be able to do it faster or better than a previous version. And just in general, these sorts of challenge runs I think are kind of a fun way to keep the Skyrim experience that we've all had many times fresh and interesting. I know that this has sort of inspired me to try out a Dead is Dead playthrough as my next project, because after really pushing the brokenness of the quick save system and the various other anti-immersive aspects of the game to their logical limit, I'm hoping to go in the opposite direction. But I eventually beat Alduin in a total of 11 hours and 2 minutes of total game time played. I think someone who was more efficient than me could probably shave some time off that as well. But by comparison, my last character that I went through the entire main quest line on took a little bit over 50 hours to beat the Alduin Fight. And so I'm pretty happy with how this went. When I started, I thought anytime under 20 hours I would be pretty happy with, so 11 hours feels pretty good to me. But that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and hit subscribe if you're interested in seeing my future content.